Hey there everyone, welcome back to another episode of Discussions of Darkness. This week I wanted to talk about one of the major differences between the World and Chronicles of Darkness setting and more traditional fantasy RPGs, or more traditional RPGs in general, that folks might be used to playing, that could throw them off a bit if they decide to walk down these dark and dreary streets. And generally speaking, what I'm referring to is how in lots of traditional RPGs, when you sit down, when you form your party, when you get your squad together, and you go out after whatever the goal of this particular campaign is, it's assumed to have a beginning and an end. And that beginning and end is usually a definite thing you're attempting to achieve. Whether you're fighting a dragon to try and get a magic item out of its hoard, whether you're opposing a lich because you want to save the people of the region from becoming members of its undead horde, whether you're attempting to negotiate peace between two kingdoms, there is a definite specific thing you're trying to do, and there are usually definite specific forces that can be defeated either for now or once and for all. But when you step into the World of Darkness as a setting, you often come across something that I have referred to in the past, for those who have been to Improved Initiative, my gaming blog, as the ever-present threat. And the ever-present threat is something that, while it might be defeated for now, you can't really kill it. You can't shoot it in the face and call it the end of the game. You can't oppose it in a court of law, a battle of wills, any of those things. You can defeat it for today. You can defeat some of its minions. The thing itself will continue to exist because that's sort of the central premise of what drives the game. If the thing were ever defeated, then this part of the setting would be over and done with. And another game which uses this particular mechanic, and that I think we can draw a lot of inspiration from if you're looking for another piece of source material to sort of wrap your head around this, is Call of Cthulhu. For folks who have not played Call of Cthulhu, it's based off the works of H.P. Lovecraft, and it deals with cosmic horror, eldritch gods, things of that nature. And it is a very important, foundational block of those stories, that these things are so beyond the power of humanity to actually affect them, that there's very little you can do to actually oppose them when it comes to trying to save the world. So Call of Cthulhu games often have creatures that are just beyond you. The best you can hope for is that you manage to keep them locked away another day and save humanity for another few years, another 80 years maybe, between when the comet comes back, when the stars align once more. But you can't kill Cthulhu. You can't destroy Nyarlathotep. They are foundational building blocks of the setting, and it doesn't matter how much dynamite you use. The best you can hope is that they go to sleep for another little while. And that's very similar to what we see in the World of Darkness settings with our ever-present threats. A good example for anyone who has played Werewolf the Apocalypse. You already know what I'm talking about. For folks who haven't played it, one of the central goals in Werewolf the Apocalypse is that there is a force called the Worm, spelled with Y, so it's more like a dragon rather than an earthworm. And it is a force of corruption and destruction that is attempting to destroy the world and eat everything around it until everything falls into darkness. Your job, as a member of the Gauru Nation, is to stop that, whether that's by fighting its minions in the shadows, stealing their resources, siphoning off their efforts, whether it's fighting them in open combat, whether it's terrorist actions that would destroy their resources, help get their minions out of their service, sort of deprogramming them. All of those things are your tools that you have as werewolves. And while you might make progress against the worm, it is very unlikely you'll ever purify it, you'll ever defeat it, you'll ever put it back in its little box and save the world entirely. It's always going to be there. It's always going to be something you have to be vigilant about. And you see a similar thing also in Werewolf with Pentex, which is essentially capitalism as an antagonist. Of you might stop this corporate merger, you might stop this drilling expedition, you might halt this particular awful product that is very harmful to people, that causes spiritual corruption, that causes bodily harm. But capitalism isn't going to stop just because you beat it that one time. It's a hydra with many heads, and if you cut one off, it sometimes feels like 2 more LLCs will just come up and come back at you. And that's really getting into the nature of what we're talking about. If you're looking for games outside of Werewolf, Changeling the Lost also uses this to great effect, of the True Fae, which are creatures from another universe that kidnap people, tear out their souls, fill the gap with magic, and then turn them into their servants. That's the basic premise of how changelings are made. Changelings who escape from the True Fae back to the real world have that constant paranoia. They never know when their keeper is going to come looking for them. They never know when another keeper might come find them, because True Fae are deity-like figures, at least in their own realm, and even coming to the mortal realm, their power is absurd. They are extraordinarily dangerous entities, and no one can really say for sure how many there are, what their nature is, or even if it's really possible to kill them once and for all. And again, that plays into a lot of the things we would see with characters like Nyarlathotep in Call of Cthulhu, of whether it's shape-changing, taking on different forms, existing simultaneously at different points in time. These are not threats that you defeat in the sense that you can kill them, that you can steal their power, that you can bury them once and for all and move on to the next threat. Even if you survive them, even if you successfully defend yourself today, they're still out there tomorrow. And this has a lot of important considerations for the game that storytellers in particular need to think about, but that players also need to consider. Now, as a storyteller, the phenomenal thing about the ever-present threat is it gives you a bad guy that is always there. It gives you this constant, looming threat. And that does a lot of things for you, and it does a lot of heavy lifting that we occasionally don't appreciate. For example, if you have an ever-present threat, it means there is something that all your player characters have buy-in on. This is everyone's problem. If they're aware of this entity, if they're aware of this threat, that means that they're aware that it will affect them the same way it affects everybody else, either in their community or in the world entirely. And that is a godsend when it comes to motivation, because if players know this thing is coming, they know that they have to oppose it, or there's nowhere their characters can really run from it. They can't really hide from it. And, well, at least not successfully, not forever. And that can do a lot for getting people to jump into plot to try and tackle things, to be proactive. However, you do run a risk as a storyteller if you feel like you're constantly snatching victory away from your players by just saying no matter what you do, it's never going to affect anything, you can never actually win. That can be very discouraging. So it's important to balance these two extremes of, while it may not be possible for your players to kill all of the True Fae, to destroy the worm, to completely reduce capitalism to rubble, it is important that you let them have their little victories, and then you make it clear they are making progress. Whether it's in a region, whether it's in a nation, or whether it's, big progress, if they did something really important and really impressive, let them celebrate that. Make it clear that they did indeed do something that matters. Even if the something they did that matters weakened the ever-present threat, or gave it, hampered it in some way, that they now it gives them an advantage in future endeavors. And that can be a very difficult thing to balance, particularly if you as a storyteller want to maintain that tension that the threat is out there and it is something you should be worried about. But if no matter what players do, it feels like they're never making any progress, they're never changing anything, they can eventually just sort of give up. It's something you see in horror movies a lot that this applies to, is the more you see of the monster, the less scary it becomes. So it's important, if you are a storyteller and you want to use the ever-present threat a lot, be subtle with it, and make sure that when it shows up, it matters. If it was a recurring villain in a TV show, for instance, it should be one of those of, even if it was defeated a few seasons ago, when we hear its name again, when we see it on screen again, they should have that moment where their hearts start to beat and they realize, oh no, we thought this was done. But lastly, and this, again, to go back to Call of Cthulhu as a good example of folks who have not played that game, of you are not going toe-to-toe with elder gods in that game. That is not how it works. It's primarily a game about solving mysteries, dealing with occult rituals, and lots of secret societies and backroom meetings. But there are still mortal servants of these great elder deities that are, in a sense, the antagonists of that particular setting. And that gives you a phenomenal link between the impossible and the possible. If you have a cult made up of mortal servants who are trying to awaken one of the old ones, who are trying to get this relic tome that they can read their rituals out of, that gives you a smaller threat, and it gives you something with a face that your players can see and they can interact with and they can defeat. And so that gives them an enemy that they can handle, that is on their level, with the implication that if they don't handle it, this will strengthen the ever-present threat in some way, or it might mean game over entirely if they don't stop the ritual, if they let this book fall into the wrong hands, if they don't handle this particular relic with proper care and thought. And that's kind of what you need to do when it comes to your ever-present threat in the World of Darkness. Say, for example, you wanted to do something with the worm, whether it's a werewolf plot, whether it's a vampire plot. The worm can touch many, many different aspects in the World of Darkness, and your players are opposing that in some way. They can't go to another realm, find like the great spirit of the worm that is the size of probably an entire planet at this point, and fight it 1v1 and expect to win. But what they can do is they can find packs of corrupted werewolves and purge them or kill them or oppose them in some way. They can find servants of the worm on boards of CEOs, and they can just fix that problem. They can take care of those smaller mortal level threats and work their way up the chain until they're making bigger progress, doing bigger things, and they're pressing their advantage against the enemy. Similar with Changelings and the True Fae, of you probably can't go to Arcadia, bang on their door, and challenge them to a duel and expect to win. You can do that, but that's really a great way to lose your character. But you can find their loyalists, their servants that go out into the world and do their bidding, and you can oppose them, you can defeat them, you can stymie their efforts in the hedge, whether it's to steal people to hunt for fun, whether it's to put out networks of merchants or spies. You can fix those problems, and it becomes sort of a shadow war, a proxy war, which is probably the best way to think about it, of if this were a Cold War situation between the force your player characters are part of and whatever the ever-present threat is. Your individual agent is not going to end this Cold War all on their own. They're probably not going to go and assassinate all of the leaders of the enemy country and then liberate it entirely on their own. But their missions behind enemy lines, the things that they do, are going to have a cumulative effect on the standing between their nation and the other nation in this particular conflict. And it helps if you keep things at that level, if you get players to really feel that what they're doing is not them working alone to try and achieve some impossible goal. They should feel like they're part of a greater community, part of a greater conflict, and that while they might be an important part of it, while the things they're doing matter, this isn't sitting all on their shoulders. This is something that's a little outside of what I think of as the normal heroic role that players often take on in RPGs, where they're expected to save the world all on their own, and expectations are a little different in the World of Darkness setting. And it's important to keep that in mind. It's important to communicate that and to make sure that character concepts, character goals, things your players want to do throughout this game really fit with what the game is made for, what the themes of the game you're running are. And that was a little all over the place today, but I hope I made my point. For folks who want to hear more about the ever-present threat, I've linked the blog description below. That made no sense, I'm sorry. I've linked the blog in the video description below, my mistake. And Down there, you'll also find a link to all of my World and Chronicles of Darkness supplements for Azukail games that have come out thus far, along with things by other creators. If you have a particular game or aspects of the game you'd like to see me talk about, then toss it down in the comments. I'll make sure to read them and see if I can work something up for future episodes. But until next time, happy gaming, everyone.